The most powerful man in the world lands in Israel tomorrow. President Joe Biden arrives in Tel Aviv at a time when Israel's tank regiments are massed along the Gaza frontier, primed and ready to roll in. When Biden lands nearly 2 weeks into a historic escalation between Hamas and Israel, he brings with him a handful of deep anxieties that I want to break down for you. Sections of the American media are describing Biden's dilemma as outrage without escalation. Think about that for a moment, viewer. Outrage without escalation. Biden was unequivocal, unambiguous about his solidarity with Israel from the start, clearly calling the October 7th attack an act of sheer evil, but also calling upon Israel now not to invade the Gaza Strip. You're wondering, why is he advising Israel so? Well, Biden's visit to Israel will be an incredibly delicate tightrope walk. As the President of the United States, he must come across as nothing but unambiguously supportive of Israel, empathetic to its anger, and understanding of how and why it is taking the steps it is now taking. At the same time, with a looming election in the United States next year, the Israel-Gaza conflict widening into more parts of the Middle East will mean the United States has no choice but to get embroiled, and that is a nightmare scenario. Which means Biden, whose re-election campaign uses his image as a reliable and experienced leader bringing stability to a world in chaos, will be a president whose nation has been drawn into 2 wars, in Ukraine first, and now the Middle East potentially. Already under pressure domestically for American resources in the Ukraine conflict, it is unlikely that the United States has the appetite for involvement in another big global conflagration. Therefore, President Biden's key priority when he lands in Israel tomorrow, I think, will be to ensure the Israel-Gaza war does not widen beyond Israel-Gaza. In Biden's view, an invasion will ensure that it will expand the war beyond Israel-Gaza. That's why he's advising Israel not to invade. Now, the bombing of Hamas positions in Gaza is also rapidly evolving, as you can see from picture after picture, into a humanitarian crisis. Galvanized by anger over continuing attacks by Hamas even now, and this escalating hostage crisis, with a video coming out of that first hostage, Biden walks a very difficult political tightrope where he cannot be seen to be advising restraint at a time when the Jewish state is at a historic emotional peak. But there are geopolitical pressures too on President Biden. A nightmare scenario, viewer, imagine, would be a regional conflict in the Middle East that draws in other countries, including Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and others. According to one of India's most foremost strategic thinkers, Brahma Chilani, for instance, a widening of this conflict would seriously undermine US interests because they would provide strategic space for Russia and China to come in and play their hand. Any void would be advantage Russia and China. And make no mistake, Biden's response to the Israel-Hamas crisis was the most visible from the get-go. It was on day one, remember itself, that he ordered America's largest warship, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier battle group, into waters off the coast of Israel, where they arrived last week, as a show of support, solidarity, and to beef up intelligence assistance to the Israeli military. The irony is, Biden will actually be hoping against hope that weapons on board this battle group don't need to be used in this crisis. Because if they need to be used, it means the balloon has gone up and war has broken out. And that brings us back to the original dilemma of outrage without escalation. If President Biden doesn't want an invasion of Gaza, how does he expect Israel to expend its will for retribution against Hamas? And don't forget the spectacular geopolitical contradictions within this region itself, viewer. Let me simplify that for you. Qatar, which hosts the chairman of Hamas as a VIP guest, also houses one of the largest expeditionary US military central command bases in the world. Before the Hamas attack on Israel, Biden had been instrumental in unfreezing $6 billion to Iran, a nation that funds, trains, and arms the Hamas. For the United States and Biden, the October 7th Hamas terrorist strike has been a violent reboot. It has reset all equations. It has completely derailed several parallel America-led missions to bring some semblance of normalcy to frayed relations in the Middle East, while ensuring it does not squander its own power in this highly sensitive region. A very angry Israel that will likely trust nobody ever again in the region is now Biden's biggest dilemma. The world already has one big war on its hands in Ukraine. A second could plunge the world into a crisis that goes beyond just economic. Much of what happens next could be in the hands of the most powerful man in the world. President Joe Biden arrives in Israel tomorrow.